The great hall of the Galactic Survival Council buzzed with voices from a dozen different worlds. Crystal beings spoke in chiming tones while aquatic creatures gurgled through water-filled breathing masks. Insect-like aliens clicked their mandibles in rapid conversation. At the center of it all stood Admiral Kextar of the Zephyrian Empire, his tall, crystalline body reflecting the chamber's bright lights. "Fellow beings of the galaxy," Kextar announced, his voice carrying through the hall like wind chimes in a storm. "Today we announce the great trial. For too long our civilizations have grown soft behind the comfort of technology. We have forgotten what it means to truly survive." The assembled representatives listened with growing interest. The Zephyrians had ruled half the galaxy for 3,000 years. When they spoke of challenges, other species paid attention. "We have discovered a world," Kextar continued. "A primitive planet designated Kepler 438b. It is what the old classifications call a Clasm death world. Dangerous creatures roam its surface. The weather changes without warning. Resources are scarce and hard to find." A murmur ran through the crowd. Death worlds were rare. Most species avoided them completely. "The challenge is simple," the Zephyrian Admiral said. "Representatives from each species will be dropped onto this world with nothing but basic clothing, no weapons, no tools, no communication devices. You must survive for 30 standard days using only what you can make from the planet itself." Deep current swimmer Oshtel raised a webbed hand. The nautiloid's voice bubbled through his breathing apparatus. "What purpose does this serve? We have evolved beyond such primitive needs." Kextar's crystal face showed what might have been a smile. "When our ships fail, when our cities fall, when our technology abandons us, what remains? Only the strength that lies within us. Only our ability to survive." The insectoid representative of the collective, Unit 7742, spoke next. "The Hive has no need for individual survival. We are many. We are one." "Then send your best drone," Kextar replied. "Let it prove the strength of the collective without the support of the hive mind." Other species began voicing their interest. Granite kings boasted of their natural armor. The plant-like chlorophyll speakers claimed they could survive anywhere with sunlight and soil. Each species seemed confident they would dominate this primitive challenge. Then a new voice spoke from the back of the hall. "Humanity accepts." The hall fell silent. All eyes turned to see Captain Jake Murphy walking forward. He was unremarkable by galactic standards, average height with brown hair and calm eyes. He wore the simple blue uniform of the human colonial fleet. Laughter began among the assembled aliens. The Zephyrians chimed with amusement. The nautiloids gurgled what sounded like mockery. Even the usually serious collective seemed to vibrate. With humor, the human's Kextar's voice carried disbelief. "You have barely achieved interstellar flight. Your species discovered fire only moments ago in galactic time. What makes you think you can survive where advanced civilizations struggle?" Jake Murphy walked to the center of the hall, ignoring the laughter around him. "Maybe that's exactly why we can survive," he said simply. The Zephyrian Admiral studied the human with growing curiosity. Humans were new to the galaxy, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. They came from a small blue world on the edge of civilized space. Most species considered them barely worth notice. "Very well," Kextar said. 12 species have accepted the challenge. The trial will begin in 7 standard days. Each representative will be dropped into a different region of Kepler 438b's main continent. Orbital monitoring stations will observe but not interfere. Emergency beacons will be provided for those who wish to forfeit. As the meeting dissolved into smaller groups, Jake Murphy found himself surrounded by curious aliens. A granite king, his rocky hide gleaming under the lights, looked down at the human. "Tell me, Softskin," the alien rumbled, "what survival training does your species possess? Do you have natural armor like mine? Can you photosynthesize like the chlorophyll speakers? Can you process raw minerals like the Zephyrians?" Jake shook his head. "No, we don't have any of those things." "Then how do you expect to survive?" Deep current swimmer Oshtal, its large eyes blinking behind his water mask, Jake thought about his childhood in Alaska. Following his grandfather through the wilderness, he remembered learning to track deer through snow, to start fires in the rain, to find food where others saw only empty forest. He thought about the stories his grandfather told of their ancestors. Humans who had survived ice ages and hunted creatures that would terrify modern civilizations. "We learn," Jake said finally. "We adapt. We hunt." The aliens exchanged glances that seemed to say the human was clearly delusional. Several began discussing betting pools on who would forfeit first. The general consensus was that the human would activate his emergency beacon within the first day, Unit-7742. Of the collective studied Jake with compound eyes. "Hunt what?" "The planet contains apex predators larger than most civilized beings." "What weapons will you create from sticks and stones?" "The same weapons my ancestors used to hunt creatures 10 times their size," Jake replied. Spears, traps, fire, patience, or laughter filled the hall. The idea that primitive weapons could threaten true predators seemed absurd to beings who traveled between stars. As the representatives began to leave, Admiral Kekstar approached Jake Murphy. "Human, I admire your courage, but I fear you do not understand what you face. Kepler 438b has claimed the lives of survey teams equipped with advanced technology. The creatures there show intelligence and pack-hunting behavior. The environment itself kills the unwary." Jake nodded respectfully. "Admiral, my people have a saying. It's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog." Zephyrian's crystal face showed confusion. "I do not understand. This reference to domesticated animals?" "That's okay," Jake said with a small smile. "You will." 7 days later, 12 beings from across the galaxy stood in the transport bay of the orbital station above Kepler 438b. Through the viewports, they could see the planet below, green and blue and beautiful from space. It looked peaceful almost. Inviting Jake Murphy checked his basic survival kit one last time. A knife, a metal cup, a blanket, fire-starting materials. Basic first aid supplies. Nothing that couldn't have been carried by a human 1,000 years ago. The other representatives carried similar kits. Though many seemed uncomfortable with such primitive equipment, the Zephyrians kept trying to activate non-existent energy. Interfaces. The collective drone appeared lost without constant communication from the hive mind. "Drop commences in 60 seconds, announced the transport pilot. "May fortune favor the worthy." As the countdown began, Jake Murphy thought one more time about his grandfather's lessons. Old Bill Murphy had been a hunting guide in Alaska for 40 years before humans ever left Earth. He had survived blizzards, bear attacks, and getting lost in the wilderness for weeks at a time. "Remember, boy," his grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. "The wilderness doesn't care how smart you think you are. It only cares if you know how to survive. And survival isn't about being the strongest or the fastest. It's about being the most stubborn." The transport doors opened. One by one, the representatives of 12 galactic civilizations dropped toward the surface of Kepler 438b. As Jake Murphy fell through the atmosphere, he felt something his alien competitors did not. He felt like he was coming home. The 12 drop pods scattered across Kepler 438b like seeds thrown by a giant hand. Each pod landed in a different region of the vast continent, separated by hundreds of miles of wilderness. In the orbital monitoring station, high above, technicians watched 12 screens showing the fate of each representative. Crystalline, Advisor Vexahan, landed first in a rocky valley filled with mineral deposits. The Zephyrian emerged from his pod with confidence, his crystal body reflecting the alien. "Son." He immediately began scanning the ground for suitable materials. His species had built their empire by manipulating mineral formations, growing cities from living rock. "Simple," Vexahan said to himself, his voice chiming like breaking glass. "I will construct a fortress of stone. These primitive conditions cannot challenge Zephyrian engineering." The Zephyrian began gathering rocks, trying to arrange them using techniques that required energy manipulation. But without his species' natural power source, the stones remained just stones. After an hour of frustration, Vexahan managed to stack a small pile that immediately collapsed when he tried to add more 200 miles away. Deep current swimmer Ashtal splashed into a lake surrounded by dense forest. The nautiloid felt immediate relief as cool water flowed over his gills. His people ruled the oceans of 7 worlds. Surely this small body of water would provide everything he needed. Ashtal dove deep, searching for the types of food his species preferred. But the lake contained only simple fish and water plants. Worse, the water was fresh, not the mineral-rich seas his body required for proper nutrition. Within hours, he began feeling weak and dizzy. Where are the thermal vents? He bubbled to himself. Where are the deep currents that carry nutrients? This water is like drinking nothing. Unit 774, 2 of the collective landed in a meadow filled with strange purple grass. The insectoid drone immediately tried to establish contact with the hive mind, spreading its antenna wide and broadcasting on all frequencies. But the technology restrictions held firm. No signal reached beyond the planet's atmosphere. For the first time in its existence, Unit 7742 experienced true silence in its mind. No voices from thousands of siblings, no guidance from the central intelligence, no shared knowledge flowing through mental links. The drone began walking in circles, lost without the constant input it had known since birth. The hive. Where is the hive? Unit 7742 clicked frantically. It cannot function alone, cannot make decisions without collective wisdom. Meanwhile, Jake Murphy's pod struck the ground in a thick forest of tall trees that reminded him of the Douglas firs back home. He emerged from the pod and took a deep breath, smelling earth and growing things and the faint scent of water somewhere nearby. Instead of immediately looking for shelter or trying to build something impressive, Jake did what his grandfather had taught him first. He stood perfectly still and listened. Birds called from the trees above. Insects buzzed in the undergrowth. Somewhere in the distance, a stream bubbled over rocks. Read the land first. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. The wilderness will tell you everything you need. To know if you know how to listen? Jake walked slowly through the forest, noting everything. The trees grew differently here than on Earth, but trees were trees. Some had nuts growing high in their branches. Others showed claw marks where animals had scraped the bark. Fresh animal droppings told him what creatures lived nearby and what they ate. Within 30 minutes, Jake had found a stream with clean water. He knelt and cupped his hands, drinking deeply.
The water was cold and pure.
Better than anything that came from a recycling system on a spaceship. Following the stream, discovered where several animal trails met at a natural crossing point. Perfect for setting snares. The banks showed tracks in the mud. Some looked like rabbit tracks, others like deer. All of them meant food if he was patient and clever. In the orbital station, the monitoring technicians watched with growing confusion. Most representatives struggled with basic tasks. The Granite King had found a cave but couldn't figure out how to make fire. The chlorophyll speaker stood in a sunny clearing, trying to absorb energy through photosynthesis but kept collapsing. From hunger because plant beings still needed water and minerals, only the humans seemed to have a plan, while others wandered aimlessly or tried to recreate the comforts of advanced civilization. Jake Murphy worked with steady purpose. He gathered dry wood and arranged it carefully. Using techniques learned in Boy Scouts decades ago, he struck sparks from his fire steel and coaxed them into flame. Soon he had a small fire burning steadily. The monitoring technicians marked this as the first successful fire created by any representative. Next, Jake began crafting tools. He found a straight branch and sharpened one end against a rough stone, creating a simple spear. He gathered flexible twigs and wove them into snares, using knots his grandfather had taught him. Each movement was careful and purposeful. "It's fascinating," said Dr. Helen Cruz, the chief observer in the monitoring station. "The human appears to be following some kind of systematic approach. Look at how he tests each tool before moving to the next task." As the first day progressed, the differences became more obvious. Vexahan had managed to create a small shelter of stacked stones, but it leaked when rain began falling. The Zephyrian huddled inside, shivering and confused by the experience of being cold and wet. Ashtal remained in his lake, growing weaker as his body rejected the fresh water. He tried to catch fish with his bare hands but lacked the speed needed in this unfamiliar environment. Unit-7742 had stopped moving entirely. Sitting in the purple grass and clicking softly to itself, without the hive mind's guidance, the drone seemed unable to make even simple decisions about food or shelter. Jake Murphy, however, had created something that amazed the observers. His shelter was simple but effective, built against a large tree. With a sloped roof that shed rain perfectly, his fire burned steadily under a small lean-to that kept it dry. 3 snares waited along the animal trails. As night fell across Kepler 438b, strange sounds began echoing through the darkness. Howls and roars filled the air. Heavy footsteps crashed through underbrush. The monitoring stations detected large heat signatures moving through the forests. Most representatives huddled in their inadequate shelters, terrified by the sounds of predators they couldn't see. Several emergency beacons blinked on standby. Ready to be activated at the first sign of real danger, Jake Murphy sat by his fire, feeding it carefully to keep the flames steady. He had placed his spear within easy reach and positioned himself so he could see the animal trails in the firelight. When something large crashed through the bushes nearby, he didn't panic. Instead, he listened carefully, noting the creature's size and movement pattern. "Just checking out the new neighbor," he said quietly to himself. "Same as bears back home. Show them you're not easy prey, and most will leave you alone." The creature, whatever it was, circled his camp twice before moving on. Jake added another piece of wood to his fire and settled in for the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight he was warm, dry, and ready in the monitoring station. Technicians watched with growing amazement as only one representative seemed truly comfortable in the wilderness conditions that were quickly defeating. Representatives from some of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. By the 3rd week, the Great Trial had become a disaster. Half the representatives had given up and been extracted from the planet. Those who remained barely survived each day, weakened by hunger and constant fear. The Galactic Survival Council watched their screens with growing alarm. Vexahan huddled in a cave, his crystal body cracked from his desperate escape. The Zephyrion had not eaten properly in days. His species absorbed minerals through skin contact, but Kepler 438b's rocks contained elements that made him sick. He spent most of his time hiding from the pack hunters that had destroyed his fortress. Deep current swimmer Ashtal clung to life in his shrinking lake. The wounded nautiloid had managed to build a raft of woven reeds, but the predators waited patiently on shore. They had learned his patterns and knew he would have to come to land eventually for the food his failing body needed. 3 other representatives remained scattered across the continent, each trapped in their own desperate, unwrapped situation. None of them ventured far from their hiding places. The planet's predators controlled the wilderness now, all except for one region. Jake Murphy's territory had become something the monitoring station struggled to understand. Jake no longer just survived in the wilderness. He had claimed it. His original camp had grown into a fortified base with multiple shelters, food storage areas, and weapon caches. Animal hides hung from drying racks. Smoked meat-filled containers made from woven grass. Maps drawn on bark showed every water source, animal trail, and predator den within miles. Dr. Helen Cruz studied the data with amazement. "Look at these readings," she told her team. "The human has eliminated the local pack that was terrorizing other representatives. Predator activity in his sector has dropped to almost nothing." Jake Murphy was not finished. He had learned that an even greater danger stalked the continent, something that made the pack hunters look small by comparison. The orbital sensors had detected it 3 days ago. A massive heat signature moving through the deepest parts of the forest. Something so large that trees bent out of its way. The monitoring team designated it Dragon Class. Due to its size and the destruction it left behind, the creature stood 3 meters tall at the shoulder and stretched nearly 8 meters. From nose to tail, its hide was covered in natural armor plates that deflected the desperate attacks of fleeing prey. Worst of all, It showed problem-solving intelligence that made it nearly unstoppable. The Dragon-class Predator had already killed 2 representatives who tried to fight it. Her emergency beacons had activated too late to save them. It was moving toward the areas where the remaining survivors hid. The Galactic Council prepared for a complete evacuation. No survival test was worth losing more lives to such a monster. Jake Murphy had different plans. He found the creature's trail on the morning of day 21. The path of destruction was easy to follow. Trees were smashed aside like twigs. Deep gouges in the earth marked where massive claws had dug for grip. The smell of death hung heavy in the air. Jake followed the trail carefully, reading the story it told. This was not a mindless beast. The creature chose its path to avoid steep terrain that would slow it down. It marked territory by scraping bark from specific trees. Most importantly, it had hunting patterns that repeated every few days. "You're smart," Jake said, studying claw marks that reached twice his height up a tree trunk. But smart hunters follow routines. Routines can be used against you. Jake spent 2 days learning everything about his new prey. The creature rested during the hottest part of the day in dense thickets that provided shade. It hunted primarily at dawn and dusk, when other animals came to water sources. It avoided areas with loose rocks that might shift under its massive weight. Most importantly, Jake discovered the creature's weakness. For all its size and armor, it was still a living thing. It needed to breathe. It needed to eat. And despite its intelligence, it had never faced a persistent hunter before. Jake began construction of something the monitoring station had never seen. It's not a shelter or a weapon, but a trap designed specifically for the planet's apex predator. He chose a narrow canyon where the creature would have to pass during its next hunting circuit. Using techniques his grandfather had taught him for hunting dangerous game, Jake prepared multiple levels of attack. He dug pits lined with fire-hardened spears. He rigged deadfall traps using massive logs suspended by rope. He created fire barriers that could be lit quickly to control the creature's movement. But the most important element was not a trap at all. It was Jake himself, positioned where the creature would see him as easy prey. On day 23, the Dragon-class Predator entered Jake's canyon just as he had predicted. The creature moved with surprising grace for something so massive, its armored hide gleaming in the morning sun. When it saw Jake standing alone in the center of the canyon, it paused. Jake did not run, stood perfectly still, spear in hand. Meeting the creature's intelligent eyes, the predator tilted its massive head. Studying this strange prey that showed no fear, the creature charged. Jake sprinted toward a prepared position, leading the monster exactly where he wanted it to go. The creature's massive feet hit the first concealed pit, and sharpened stakes punched through the armor plates on its legs. It roared in pain and rage, but its momentum carried it forward. The second trap triggered as the creature stumbled. Massive logs swung down from the canyon walls, striking the beast from both sides. The impact would have killed any normal predator, but this creature's armor absorbed most of the blow. Jake lit his fire barriers, trapping the wounded predator in a circle of flames. The creature spun in circles, looking for escape. But Jake had planned for this too. Every exit led to another trap, another line of sharpened stakes or swinging logs. The battle lasted 3 hours. The monitoring station recorded every moment as Jake Murphy fought the planet's apex predator using nothing but primitive weapons and tactics developed by human hunters thousands of years ago. The creature was stronger. It was larger. It had natural armor and terrible claws. But Jake had something the predator had never encountered before. He had the accumulated hunting wisdom of a species that had climbed to the top of Earth's food chain by refusing to give up. When the Dragon-class Predator finally fell, Jake stood over its body, covered in mud and blood, but very much alive. He had not just survived the encounter, he had won in the monitoring station. Complete silence filled the observation deck. The representatives of a dozen galactic civilizations stared at their screens. Watching a human butcher the creature that had terrorized an entire continent, Jake Murphy began processing his kill with the efficient movements of someone who had done this many times before. Soon, smoke rose from his fires as he prepared enough meat to last weeks. The hide would become better armor. The bones would become stronger weapons. The human had not just defeated the apex predator, he had replaced it. The first week on Kepler 438b separated the survivors from the desperate. In the orbital monitoring station, red warning lights blinked on 3 screens. 3 representatives had already activated their emergency beacons and been extracted from the planet's surface. The chlorophyll speaker had collapsed on the 4th day, unable to process the alien soil's minerals. The Granite King had been defeated not by predators, but by simple dehydration when he couldn't find water that didn't taste wrong to his rock-based biology. Unit 7742 of the collective had simply shut down, overwhelmed by the silence in its mind, but the real danger was just beginning to show itself. Vexahan crouched inside his stone shelter, listening to the sounds outside. Something large moved through the darkness, sniffing at the walls he had built. Zephyrian had spent 3 days creating what he thought was an impregnable fortress, stacking rocks and using mud to seal the gaps. The creature outside made a sound like grinding metal mixed. With an animal growl, Vexahan heard scratching against stone, then silence. He allowed himself to hope the predator had moved on. The wall exploded inward. Dirt and rocks flew across the small space as massive claws tore through the stone like paper. Vexahan caught a glimpse of something impossible, a creature that looked like a wolf crossed with a bear, but larger than either. Its eyes glowed yellow in the darkness. Its teeth were longer than Vexahan's crystal fingers. The Zephyrian scrambled through a gap in the back wall, its crystal body scraping against stone. The creature's jaws snapped closed where he had been a moment before. Vexahan ran into the forest, branches scratching his reflective surface. Behind him, the predator's roar shook the trees. 200 miles away, deep-current swimmer Ashtal faced his own nightmare. The nautiloid had grown, weaker each day, his body rejecting the fresh water that surrounded him. Worse, he had discovered he was not alone in the lake. Pack hunters had learned his routine. Every time Ashtal surfaced to breathe, yellow eyes watched from the shoreline. Every time he dove for the small fish that kept him barely alive, the creatures moved closer to the water's edge. Tonight, they had lost patience. Ashtal heard splashing as the first predator entered the water. These were not water creatures, but they could swim well enough. More splashes followed as the pack surrounded him. The nautiloid found himself trapped in the center of his own lake. Predators closing in from all sides, he dove deep, but the creatures were patient. They could hold their breath longer than he could stay submerged. When Ashtal finally had to surface for air, jaws snapped at him from 3 directions. He barely escaped with his life. Now he was wounded and bleeding into the water. The monitoring station tracked similar scenes across the continent. 8 of the original 12 representatives now huddled in inadequate shelters, terrified and barely surviving. The planet's predators had found them, and these were not simple animals. The creatures showed intelligence. They tested defenses, learned patterns, and coordinated attacks. Worse, they seemed to be getting larger and more aggressive as the week progressed. Dr. Helen Cruz studied the data with growing concern. These predators are unlike anything in our database, she told her team. They're not just hunting for food. They're systematically eliminating threats to their territory. Then something appeared on Jake Murphy's screen that made everyone in the monitoring station stop talking. The human was not hiding from the predators. He was tracking them. Jake crouched beside a stream, studying marks in the mud. The tracks were huge, easily twice the size of a grizzly bear's paw. But tracks told stories if you knew how to read them. These showed a creature that walked on for legs, but could rear up onto. The depth of the prints indicated massive weight, but the spacing showed surprising speed. Pack hunters, Jake said quietly, remembering his grandfather's lessons about reading sign. But they're not wolves. Too big, too smart. He followed the trail carefully, noting broken branches and scraped bark. The creatures had passed this way recently, probably during the night. They were heading toward the lake where he had seen the nautiloid representative during his first day of scouting. Jake found the pack's resting place in a grove of thick trees. The ground was torn up from many large bodies. Bones lay scattered around the area, some still fresh. These predators had been busy, but what interested Jake most was not the bones, but the way the pack had arranged their sleeping area. They posted guards. They chose positions that controlled access routes. They had even dug small pits for storing food. "You're not just smart," Jake said to himself. "You're organized. That makes you dangerous, but it also makes you predictable." Jake began preparing for something the monitoring station had never recorded in any survival competition. Instead of avoiding the predators or trying to hide from them, he was going to hunt them. He spent the day crafting weapons his grandfather had taught him to make. A longer spear with a fire-hardened tip, a sling made from woven plant fibers, throwing sticks, balanced for accuracy. He dug a small pit and lined it with sharpened stakes, then covered it with branches and leaves. As night fell, Jake did something that amazed the orbital observers. He walked directly toward the area where the pack hunters were most active, carrying a burning branch as a torch. The first predator appeared at the edge of his torchlight, yellow eyes reflecting the flames. It was even larger than Jake had expected, standing as tall as a horse at the shoulder. Its mouth opened to show teeth designed for crushing bone. Jake did not run. Instead, he planted his feet and raised his spear, the way his ancestors had faced creatures just as dangerous thousands of years ago. The predator circled him, testing. Jake turned to keep it in sight, his spear point never wavering. Two more shapes appeared at the edge of the light. The pack was testing this strange new prey. The lead predator lunged. Jake sidestepped and thrust with his spear the fire-hardened, point striking the creature's shoulder. It roared and spun away, surprised by the pain. Blood dripped from the wound. The first time any of the planet's predators had been injured by a representative, Jake pulled out his sling and loaded it with a sharp stone. The next predator that came too close received a rock to the skull that sent it sprawling. The pack began to back away, confused by prey that fought back effectively. Jake advanced toward them, his torch held high. The predators gave ground, unused to creatures that showed no fear. When Jake reached the edge of the grove where they had been resting, he thrust his torch into the dry grass and leaves. Fire spread quickly through the undergrowth. The pack fled, their territory burning behind them. Jake watched them go, then began following at a safe distance. He had learned something important about these predators tonight. They were smart, but they were also afraid of fire. And Jake Murphy knew more about using fire as a weapon than any creature on this planet in the monitoring station. Technicians watched in amazement as the human who had been written off as primitive began a campaign that would change how the galaxy viewed humanity. Forever, the hunt had begun. Day 30 arrived with clear skies and a silence that had not existed on Kepler 438b for weeks. In the orbital monitoring station, only one screen still showed an active representative. Jake Murphy sat by his fire, checking his equipment and preparing for extraction. Around him lay the evidence of 30 days that had changed galactic understanding forever. His camp looked more like a small village than a survival shelter. Multiple buildings served different purposes. Weapon racks held spears, clubs, and tools crafted from bone and wood. Smoking racks preserved enough meat to feed a dozen people for months. Most shocking to the observers were the trophies. Skulls from pack hunters lined the camp's perimeter. The massive skull of the Dragon-class predator sat at the center like a throne. Hides from a dozen different predators had been turned into clothing, blankets, and armor. Jake Murphy had not just survived Kepler 438b. He had conquered it. The other representatives had been extracted over the past week. Exahan barely survived. His rescue, his crystal body severely damaged and his confidence completely shattered. Deep current swimmer Ashtal required immediate medical treatment for malnutrition and infected wounds. The few others who lasted beyond the second week were found in states of near collapse. Only Jake Murphy stood ready for extraction. Healthy and carrying enough supplies to last another month on the planet's surface, Admiral Kekstar materialized. In the monitoring station through a holographic projector, his crystal face showing emotions that his species rarely displayed. Behind him stood representatives from across the galaxy, all watching the screens that showed humanity's impossible success. "Explain this," Kekstar demanded, his chiming voice filled with confusion. "How did a primitive species achieve what our most advanced civilizations could not? The humans should have been the first to fail, not the only one to succeed." Dr. Helen Cruz pulled up the data files they had compiled over 30 days of observation. "Admiral, I think we have been operating under a fundamental misunderstanding about humanity and their home world." Admiral Lisa Carter joined the conversation from the human ship in orbit. She had watched every day of Jake Murphy's performance with growing pride and a deep understanding of what the galaxy was witnessing. "You called us primitive," Lisa said calmly. "You assumed that because we recently achieved interstellar flight, we were somehow lesser than species who had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. But you made a critical error in that assumption." The assembled alien representatives listened with growing attention. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled half the galaxy through superior technology. The idea that they had misjudged an entire species was difficult to accept. "Our technology may be new," Lisa continued, "but our survival skills are millions of years old. Earth is what you classify as a classum death world. Everything on our planet evolved to kill everything else. For our entire evolutionary history, humans have been both predator and prey." She gestured toward the screen showing Jake Murphy calmly packing his gear. "What you watched was not special training or unique ability. Every human child learned some version of those skills. Okay? We call it camping, hiking, hunting, or just playing outdoors. For us, survival in hostile environments is not an advanced technique. It is childhood education." Admiral Kekstar studied the human representative with new interest. "But your species has cities, technology, space travel. Surely you have evolved beyond such primitive needs." Lisa smiled. "We build cities on a world where hurricanes, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions regularly destroy them. Then we rebuild them stronger. We created technology while living on a planet covered with predators that see us as food. We achieved spaceflight while dealing with ice ages, plagues, and wars that would destroy most civilizations." Dr. Cruz brought up comparative data on her screens. "Look at the evolutionary records. Zephyrians developed on a world rich in energy sources with few natural predators. The nautiloids evolved in deep oceans with abundant food and minimal competition. Most galactic species developed intelligence as a response to environmental stability, not constant threat. Humans are different," Lisa said. "We developed intelligence as a weapon. Every advancement our species made was designed to help us survive in an environment that was actively trying to kill us. Fire, tools, language, agriculture, even space travel, all developed because Earth forced us to adapt or die." The monitoring station showed Jake Murphy's final preparations. He had created detailed maps of the planet's geography, cataloged dozens of edible plants, and documented the behavior patterns of every predator species he had encountered. His work would have taken a scientific survey team months to complete. "Human accomplished in 30 days what we thought would require years of study," Dr. Cruz observed. He did not just survive Kepler 438b, he understood it completely. Jake Murphy activated his communication device, signaling readiness for extraction. His voice came through clearly, calm, and unhurried. "Control, this is Murphy. Ready for pickup whenever convenient. No rush, though. This place reminds me of camping trips with my grandfather back in Montana. Pretty peaceful once you deal with the local wildlife." The alien representatives exchanged glances that spoke of a fundamental shift in their understanding. The human described 30 days on a death world that had defeated their best representatives as peaceful camping. As the extraction ship descended toward Jake's location, Admiral Kekstar asked the question that would reshape galactic military doctrine for generations to come. "Admiral Carter, if your species possesses such capabilities, why did you accept our challenge?" "You must have known the outcome." Lisa Carter considered her answer carefully. "Because you needed to understand what humanity brings to the galaxy. We are not the primitive newcomers you thought we were. We are a species that survived and thrived on a world that would terrify most of your civilizations." Jake Murphy climbed aboard the extraction ship, carrying a pack full of tools, maps, and preserved food. He looked completely comfortable, as if he was returning from a successful vacation rather than the most challenging survival test in galactic history. The pilot, a nervous Sifarian technician, asked, "Was the survival test difficult, human?" Jake settled into his seat and smiled. "Not really. Though I have to say, the local predators were more cooperative than grizzly bears. Bears back home are smart enough to avoid hunters. These creatures just kept coming at me the same way every time." As the ship rose toward orbit, Jake Murphy looked down at Kepler 438b one last time. "Nice planet," he said to himself. "Good hunting, clean water, plenty of game. Reminds me why I became a colonial fleet officer in the first place. There are whole worlds out there just waiting for humans to make them home." The Great Trial was quietly discontinued the next day. New guidelines were issued for planetary classification systems. And across known space, military strategists began reconsidering their assumptions about the species they had dismissed as barely civilized primitives. Humanity had earned their place among the stars, not through superior technology, but by being exactly what evolution had made them. The ultimate survivors on a galaxy full of worlds that had never truly tested the species that lived on them. The humans had arrived, and they were already hunting.